Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today we are going to talk about Focal. Alright, before we get into that, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel and look for ways to support me going forward so I can continue to bring you, hopefully, fun and exciting audio reviews and other audio-related content. Alright, so I want to talk about Focal, the company, specifically their headphone line. So back in, I don't know, September, October, somewhere in that time frame, I did a small little Focal shootout video that had the Stellia, the Radiance, and the Clear MG in it. Well, since that video, I have also had the opportunity to review the Utopia, the original Clear, and the Elex. And so having reviewed all of those and also having owned the Elegia back a while ago now, right, I have now had significant amount of head time with all of the Focal models except for the Elegia and the Celesti. So what I want to do here today is just kind of give some impressions about Focal's headphone line and just talk about them because I've heard a number of them and there's some interesting things there. So the models that I have heard and or owned, and I actually still have a couple of them on hand here. Like here is the Radiance because I own that one and all that, and then I still have the Elex, which I just reviewed recently, and I will link to all of my reviews and that first shootout that I talked about for all of these Focal headphones in the description below. So look out for that. So quick recap here. The models that I have just mentioned. Okay, the Elex is distributed in the United States by Massdrop, and that lists for $700 US. The Elegia is now a discontinued model. It was originally $990, and then Adorama, at least here in the United States, did that thing where they marked it down to $430, $399, $379. Okay, they really brought the price of that down there for a while. The Radiance right here is $1,390 brand new, but it's also a limited edition. And I don't know how many of them are still out there brand new for sale. So that one might really only be available on the used market anymore. Or if it's not now, it probably will be soon. Then, not with me right now, is the Clear models, the two Clears, the OG and the MG. Those both list for $1,490 US. The original Clear is now also discontinued. Now, there are still a few of them brand new floating around out there that you can still buy. They are still listed at $1,490. Sometimes they go on sale for significantly less than that, so be on the lookout for those. And they do pop up with some regularity on the used market, so also be on the lookout for that. All right, then the Stellia is $2,990 US, so about a $3,000 headphone. Also a closed back model, and then their flagship model is the Utopia, which costs $3,990 US, or basically $4,000. Okay, so let's just look at their lineup as a whole and talk about like what are some characteristics of the Focal headphone brand and also some of the strengths and the weaknesses, and then I have some like personal awards, so to speak, to hand out, which mean absolutely nothing, just kind of a gag to tie the whole thing together. Anyway, getting into that. So one thing about Focals, and like, I mean, here are two examples, is they all have very similar builds. Like the chassis, however you want to say it, like they all have the same basic frame to them. And what changes, you can see it here, is like the cup design, like just the styling, sometimes the colors and the materials used in the styling. Okay, which, I mean, the fanciness of the look tends to increase with price and that sort of thing. And some of them can be very good looking models in my opinion, but they all are basically the same build. Okay, they are all, I've joked about this, you know, a riff on the idea of man spreading, but they're all can spreaders and that they spread out like this. Many headphones push the cups together, so if you are hanging a bunch of these on a shelf or something like that next to other headphones, like these will take up more space. They also don't collapse down well at all, and they usually come in very nice carrying cases, like here's the one for my Radiance and all of that. Okay, they don't collapse down at all, so they're going to take up this much room if you want to travel with them. Okay, now that is another aspect of the Focal brand, which we'll get to here in a moment. But I mean, they all have pretty good clamp where they strike a good balance of staying on your head but not pinching too tight. And so, I mean, with this here, you can shake your head around and they stay in place pretty well. All that, and they're also quite comfortable. Then, I mean, they have this nice telescoping mechanism here, and then that part, the rotation this way, is up here in these headphones. So that's a really unique feature to Focal. So they have that kind of interesting build to them there. Focals, I mean, so they all look very similar. They're all built very similar in this that they're all built very well. Okay? The attention to detail on the construction is always very good. They all have this spring-loaded action here in the cup motion this way. Okay, they're rugged. They just are very well built, very well designed from an ergonomic standpoint, and I find them quite comfortable. Some people might think that the ear space in there is a little too small. That's fair. I have these average-sized ears, so it doesn't bother me at all. And again, I like the balance between the clamp force and the staying in place on the head pretty well. And then most of their pads, even though they are a little bit different, like you have the, I don't know if it's real leather or faux leather here on the Radiance, okay, but then you have more of the cloth here on the Elex, but they're all soft and cushy and fairly comfortable, and they seal well. Okay, at least, you know, the pad seals well. Now, the closed back models. So here we're talking about Elegia. I assume Stellia, although I have not heard that one or had that one in hand, but the Radiance and the Stellia also all isolate very well. They hold ambient sounds out quite well. They hold music sounds in fairly well. So they would be very friendly for traveling and office situations, you know, on the go or office situations and that sort of thing. Now, I mentioned this just a moment ago, and with the carrying case and all of that, like why might you want to carry these things? Why might you want to use these on the go? And that's because another aspect of the Focal headphone line is that they are all easy to drive. Their impedance varies from about 35 ohms, which is where I think the Elegia and the Radiance are rated, up to 80 ohms, which is where the Elex and the Utopia hang out. But they are all fairly efficient. Usually, and maybe not every single model, but usually they have like, you know, 100 plus, you know, between 100 and 105 decibel per milliwatt sensitivities. And so they're all dynamic drivers, they're all low impedance, they're all high sensitivity, so they are easy driving headphones. So you can use them with portable amps, you can use them with DAPs, and you can plug them right into phones if you want to. Okay, they're not terrible that way, but they definitely sound better with amps. But they are mobile amp friendly is the point here. And so their easiness to drive makes them attractive because of that, particularly with the closed backs and how well they isolate. They also, all but the Utopia, have the dual 3.5 millimeter plugs in there for the cable entry. And they are recessed, but the recess opening here is thick enough that just about any 3.5 millimeter plug that I have tried fits in there fairly well. And I think that's nice for a couple of reasons. For one, I think that connector type, it strikes a good balance of durability, but also like it will still pull out and break away. So for on the go applications, it's those things that are rugged enough that they're not going to break super easy. They stay plugged in pretty well, but if you snag your cord on something while you're out and about, it just pulls out of the headphone and doesn't do any real long-term damage usually. So I think those are all pluses there. The one exception to that is the Utopia, which has a proprietary 2-pin connector on it, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Okay, and so I'm not real pleased that Focal just decided to change the connector type for that one headphone. So then another aspect then of the entire line, since we're on that cable entry system, is that their stock cables suck. Like, they're bad. Okay, they are all stiff. They have lots of memory, and they can tangle fairly easily. So you're gonna want aftermarket cables for these. Like, even if you're in the camp where cables don't matter sonically, I think they do. But even if you're in the camp that they don't, you still are gonna want an aftermarket cable for Focal headphones for ergonomic reasons. Okay, get something that doesn't tangle as easily, that lays flat and doesn't snag because it's all kinked up as much and like that sort of thing. Okay, so then let's talk about their sonic attributes. Some keys to the Focal House sound. They all excel at macro dynamics. They are all punchy. They have a lot of impact and slam and just a lot of physicality that they bring. Now, that doesn't mean that they all have elevated bass. In fact, the only one that actually has like elevated bass, at least of the ones that I have heard to, is this one is the Radiance. Okay, it has an actual elevated bass shelf in addition to that punch and that slam in the low end anyway. But the rest of them are all more neutrally tuned in the low end, but they all bring that macrodynamic punch, slam, and just that dynamic impact. Absolutely a feature of the Focal House sound. They all are also quite resolving at their price points. The Elegia was like kind of my gateway drug headphone once upon a time, where it really got me into more high-end headphones, and that's because it introduced a new level of detail that I had not heard before. Okay, so that was a thing. The Radiance is surprisingly resolving at $1,300. The Clear, at least the OG, is also very resolving. One of the more resolving $1,500-ish headphones out there right now. Yeah, I think, even though it is now an older model, released in 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, I think. Okay, it is held up in terms of its detail retrieval, even in these intervening 4, 5, 6 years. Okay, then you get into like the Stellia is also very resolving, and then Utopia is quite resolving too. I have compared the Utopia to other $4,000 and other top-of-the-line models, and I find that its level of detail retrieval is quite competitive up there, even though it is one of the only dynamic driver, like $4,000-ish headphones out there right now. It holds its own in the detail retrieval and resolution departments. Okay, they're all also somewhat amp forgiving. So I just mentioned the Elegia. The Elegia plays really nice with lower tier amplifiers. Like you can plug that thing into an Atom or a Liquid Spark or one of the shit Magnis or something like that, and it's going to sound fine. It's going to sound pretty good, actually. The same is true of the Radiance. Even the Clear, the OG Clear at least, and I'll even say the MG in there. You plug that into, say, a shit Asgard 3, it sounds good. It sounds good, okay? Same is true of the Elex. So even if your signal chain isn't super expensive, you're still going to get pretty good performance out of most of the Focals. They do vary somewhat in how much they scale up. Like the Elegia has this magical property of, like, it rings the most out of the sound, even on those lower tier amps, but it does peter out a little more quickly than some of its similarly priced headphones from other companies in terms of scaling upwards and revealing higher quality signal chains. Other models like Radiance, the OG Clear, even the Elex to a degree, but then also the Stellia and the Utopia, like as your signal chain quality climbs, they will scale with that and become increasingly resolving and higher performing and all of that too. So yes, there are some amps that work better with Focals than other amps, just like any other headphone out there. They tend not to work great with tube amps until you get to tube amps that are really, really expensive, because their low impedance tends to not do so great when the output impedance is a little bit high, as most tube amp output impedances are. So you're not going to want to plug these into a dark voice. Well, maybe you want to, and get that really sloppy, boomy bass that comes from the high output impedance of the dark voice, competing with the low impedance of the Focal drivers. And I have an output impedance video where I can link to into explaining some of that. Anyway, you get some flexibility with solid state amps with these. Not so much with tube amps until you get up to the really high-end tube amps where they have figured out how to use transformers to bring down that output impedance. And then you're pretty much looking at Utopia, maybe Stellia if you need a closed back. Okay, up in that range. All right. They all also have a very similar trait in their sound staging. I have described it as a wraparound effect, or a 360-degree effect, or your head in a bubble. Basically, their sound staging is fairly intimate. It's not necessarily small. It just kind of puts you in the middle of things, and there's almost a wrap around the head kind of effect going on. So I've said this before, but I'll say it again here. It's a lot like if you consider speakers, where speakers like create this sound out in front of you. And yes, maybe some really excellent speakers can give you a sense of room reverbs and audience noise from a live recording or something like that going on to the sides and behind you. But for the most part, the music is out in front. It's like going to a symphonic performance and sitting in the audience and hearing the music coming up from the stage there. That's what speakers are like, at least to my ear. Focals, and the way they do their staging, almost it's like it puts you on the maestro's stand. You're a little closer to the performance. It kind of wraps around to the sides of you. Like the instruments and all that don't necessarily come from behind you, but you're more like here instead of out here in the staging. That effect is neither good nor bad in a universal sense. It works better for some recordings than others, and it's also very much a matter of personal preference, but they all have that trait to some degree. The one that noticeably breaks from that a little bit anyway is the Utopia, in that it also has this great sense of depth. Like it does this dimension, okay, forward and backward from your position much better than the rest of the line. I mean, again, it is the highest performer. It's their flagship model. But it can also sometimes sound a little bit narrow and deep because of that. But usually that's not a problem. Okay, and generally that's that bubble staging that I'm talking about. They all have that to some degree. They do vary in size, like just the size of that bubble somewhat, but it's there for all of them. Okay, sonic weaknesses. For the most part, one thing that Focal is, they haven't nailed completely in all of their models yet, is timbre. The Elegia can be a little bit mid-forward and shouty sometimes, and then its sub-bass, the presence is a little bit lacking at times. It still has that punch and that slam, but it's a little bit lacking at times. The Elex is just, it's okay at timbre. It's not great. I would say the same thing for the original Clear. It's okay, it's not great. Clear MG is way too mid-forward and shouty. The Stellia also has this weird kind of scoop in the lower mids or an elevation in the upper mids, which also can make it a little bit shouty, honky, hollow sounding kind of too in the timbre. So overall in their line, I would say timbre is not a strength of Focal. However, the Radiance does natural timbre and tonality quite well. Does it very well for its price and very well for a Focal. And the Utopia is also fairly strong in timbre and tonality, which you would hope for being a flagship top-of-the-line model. Okay, so that would be like the biggest drawback, I think, to many of the Focals. They vary in how not strong they are in it. Like the Elegia, not particularly strong at natural timbre. It's a little bit more forgivable at its price. The Clear MG is just bad. Okay, that one, it cannot do natural timbre to save its life, in my opinion. The Clear OG is okay. It's not great, it's not horrible, and then I would put the Stellia in that category too. It's not horrible, it's got a little bit of wonkiness here, but it could be better, particularly at $3,000. All right, but that's really it. You know, and it just depends on where you are on that staging effect as to whether that's a strength or a weakness. I don't consider either of those things, it just kind of is. But like imaging and separation and all of that usually are fairly strong with the Focals, and they're within that. All right, so with that said about just traits of their house sound, again, they don't really have a universal signature. You've got warm and bassy with the Radiance. You have more like the Clear OG is more neutral bright. The MG and the Elegia are more neutral to mid forward. With the MG has a little bit of more warmth in there. The The Stellia is, I would say, more of a neutral mid-forward, and then Utopia might have just a slight perceptive U to it, just a tiny elevation in the really deep sub-bass and a tiny elevation in the air frequencies, but it's still mostly neutral. Okay, so they vary a little bit in their signatures, mostly hanging closer to neutral than not. But they do have some exceptions in there too. So there's not a set like frequency response signature that they have either. Okay, for me, personal awards here for the Focal. Their best overall headphone in terms of just overall performance is the Utopia, as it should be. It is their flagship model. It is their best sounding headphone all around. Okay, so congrats to them. They did it well. The best value at list price, I think, is the Radiance. The combination of resolution, impact, punch, slam, that sort of thing, staging, being easy to drive, on doing it all in a closed back form factor at $1,290. Big time value proposition here. Really like this headphone. Okay, so I will give this one the award for best value in their line at list price. The Elegia at $400 is a really darn good value, though. So if you got that one for that price, or you can still get one for that price, yeah, huge value proposition there too. And then the original Clear, if you can get that one under $1,000, at about $1,000 or less, somewhere in the upper hundreds, that also, I think, changes the value proposition a lot too. Okay, so at list price, I give best value to the Radiance. The other prices that I just mentioned for the Elegia and the Clear, just because I have seen multiple units go on sale or sell used in that price range, means that you can land that deal, and that is also an excellent value. I have not seen Stellia go on those kinds of sales. You can get a good price for that when used, but list price for a brand new model or a sale price, I just haven't really seen that happen yet. Okay, then I will give an award, although it's really not the one you want. I think the one unit, the one model in Focal's line of the ones that I've heard that was just a complete miss was the Clear MG. Too shouty for me. I think it's a step back from the Clear OG in resolution, particularly in the mid-range. And then it's also its frequency response is just a little imbalanced, a little too mid-forward. It can have a big spike in the air frequencies sometimes, which can give people some kind of vertigo-like symptoms at times. Focal has acknowledged that and supposedly fixed it. But just overall, its overall performance I just thought was a miss. In which Focal, I think a lot of them in their headphone line, they make some really good headphones that fill in some use cases that there's not a lot of other competition for, and they fill that need well more often than not. But I just think that particular model just needs work. All right, so there it is, my thoughts on Focal's headphone line. And again, overall, I like them. I think Focal is doing good things, and I'm excited to see what they can come up with in the future. So as they release things, hopefully I will be there to review them and report to you how that goes. So anyway, I'm Wave Theory. Thanks for listening to my ramblings about the Focal headphone line, and until next time, enjoy the music.